right, and I'd invite you to take your Bibles and let's go to the book of Proverbs chapter 19. Proverbs chapter 19, if we could back up to the beginning of the chapter, just kind of do a little bit of a review of where we've been at, and even more so than usual, because the first two verses we're going to look at this evening, I believe, tie back and kind of carry on some thoughts from the first passage. So I'd like to spend just a few minutes reminding ourselves of where we've been and where we're coming from. In verse number 1, we did talk about just the concept of it doesn't cost anything to do what's right. I really hope that kind of stuck with us, resonated with us, because it may be hard to do what's right, but it doesn't cost us any money to do so, right? It doesn't require anything other than just really the moral fortitude to do what we ought to. And kind of tied that together with verse number 2, and we moved into the fact that the soul without knowledge, and just the fact that we ought to be educating our soul, that the inside of us matter, and kind of contrasted that with the second part of verse 2 when it talks about he that hasteth with his feet sinneth, and drew the concept, the comparison, or the thought out, if you will, that the more that you know, the slower it probably ought to make you. Just the fact that really knowledge itself, you should not be adding knowledge, and kind of the mindset you have is, now I know more. Really, the more the mindset that it ought to give to us is, now I understand how much more I still don't know, right? And so it really ought to make us slow down a little bit. We looked at verse number 3 and drew some thoughts about how a foolish man, they don't set out to pervert their way. It's a rare man indeed. I do think this is a rare man indeed, that no matter how foolish the decisions are, how bad the mistakes are, most people don't look at things and say, this is a bad choice, this is the worst choice, this is what I'm going to do. They may find themselves doing it just because for a bunch of different reasons, not thinking, or whatever the case may be. But we need to understand that bad decisions, it makes your way crooked, right? Or foolishness makes your way crooked. There's a actual, literal, physical reality to when you make poor decisions, there's consequences to that. There was a few verses we looked at, starting with verse number 4 about wealth, talked about how really just the fact that money opens doors, wealth opens doors. And I know it's easy to kind of look at people with money and that concept and think and always have a negative or pejorative attitude with it, but there's also value to it and something that we can experience and deal with and make use of in our own lives. Verse number 5, it talks about the words that we use, kind of going back to that theme, talking about how people that say false things, people that are not true, people that are lying, there's punishment, there's involvement in negative aspects of that in your life. Verse number 6 returned to this concept of kind of wealth and power, and drew the concept out for us that the more power that someone has, it affects how people respond to them. And again, this is not really a instruction, is more of an observation, but we should learn from what we see going on around us. It's kind of the Fiddler on the Roof theology of it's no sin to be poor, but it's no great honor either, right? And we just have to be careful about kind of looking at riches and wealth, and it's always a negative. In fact, Proverbs talks a lot about how then if you'll do what's right, you'll do what you're supposed to do, you'll work hard, you won't be lazy. There's physical and temporal benefits that oftentimes come along with that. He bore down on that in verse number 7. All the brethren of the poor do hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? He pursueth them with words, yet they are wanting to him. And really, when we think about when it tells us stuff like that, it really ought to say, man, I ought to get up and go to work tomorrow, right? It ought to be a driving factor. Here's a negative aspect of a lack of resources, and to the best of my ability, not compromising. We talked about integrity in verse 1, but not compromising, not doing bad things, but just making an effort to improve ourselves. That brings us to verses 8 and 9, and both of these verses we'll cover relatively quickly, I think, just because I think it is kind of hearkening back to some things we looked at last week, but I do want to touch on it. Look at verse number 8 with me. He that getteth wisdom, I am already struggling to speak tonight. He that getteth wisdom loveth his own soul. He that keepeth understanding shall find good. I'd like to go back to verse 2. I know I just covered it, but I want you to see a connection here. So In verse 2, it says, also that the soul be without knowledge, it is not good, right? We talked about that, so I'm not going to kind of rehash it, but I want to go back, tie it back to verse number 2. And in verse number 8, it says, he that getteth wisdom loveth his own soul, right? So we have on one hand, if you don't have this, it's a bad thing. I think the alternative is implied, if not an implicit, but he states it out for us here. He that getteth wisdom loveth his own soul. I want to ask you a kind of maybe a weird question, maybe you haven't thought about. Do you love your soul, right? The reality is I was listening to something that probably was, listened to a book on Roman history, so it probably was some old Roman that said it. And he said that we're not bodies that have a soul, we're souls that have bodies. And I think there's some theological veracity to that. And, who's got a doctor's appointment? You don't have to raise your hand, but let me just ask you. I probably could tell you who does. Who has a doctor's appointment scheduled right now for something in the future? Right. Most of y'all do, right? And think about with doctors. I don't. Probably ought to, but I don't, right? And so, I feel like the few times I've ever been to a doctor, I had a bunch of allergy problems. I still have them. I'm just kind of, keeping it to a low war. So I went and saw an allergist multiple times. And one thing I noticed about a doctor is I feel like this is the case, they're always going to set up a follow-up appointment, right? Come back in, even if it's your yearly physical, they'll schedule it a year out. We'll be around. If you're around, you come back and see us, right? Like, there's always come back and see us, and there could be money at play with some of that, but there's also a sense of, hey, we need to check up on this. We need to see how your medication's doing. How is this treatment plan working for you? Is your needs being taken care of, right? And I look around at a room, I just know most of y'all are pretty faithful and consistent. I'm not even saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying that you take care of yourself, right? Who's all ate today? Most of y'all are probably eating today, or you haven't eaten, or you're probably going to, right? I don't normally eat before church on Wednesday nights. I don't think I ever have, so I don't know exactly what would happen, but it feels like a bad idea, right? I'm just not interested in preaching right after I've eaten, right? And time is always an issue, right? But even if you didn't eat today, something came up, you had a bad day, it's not like you're not going to eat tomorrow, right? And why are you going to eat tomorrow? Today? Well, ultimately, you're hungry, but you also don't want to die, right? And that's the extreme example, but really you're taking care of yourself quite well in most of the cases, right? Right, we're doing that. We're doing that. And I could keep on going down the list. Like, what do you do if, like, I had to get up, you have to get up early or whatever? Well, I need to go to bed early tonight. I'm tired, right? Taking care of yourself. When's the last time you did anything about your soul? Amen. We go through all and I'm not saying, again, I'll reiterate it here. I'm all for taking care of yourself. If you need to go to the doctor, go to the doctor. If you need to have stuff, you ought to get enough sleep at night. You ought to make sure you're eating on a regular basis. But what are you doing about your soul? You say, well, how can I said we weren't going to spend a lot of time on these two verses, but here we go. But how do I take care of my soul? Without going into an awful lot of detail, I would say that there's spiritual component here that we really need to consider about. And what I would say is, let me kind of back up to a question I asked. If you ate yesterday, you're eating today, and you're eating tomorrow, you're going to eat Friday, you're going to eat Thursday, you're going to eat Saturday. Like, are you going to eat next Tuesday? Just in general, do you plan on eating next Tuesday? I'm not saying you know what you're going to eat. Do you have something planned? Probably so. And my question would be, what makes you think you can come to a few church services and have your soul fed? Amen. This is like, I'm going to use it, and don't take this in a pejorative way because I completely don't mean it like that. Coming to church is like going out to eat, right? You don't have to do any of the work in one sense. I mean, you have to come and pay attention. Don't take my example too far, right? But you just get to kind of come. Somebody's made a meal. Somebody's come prepared to give you some stuff. I mean, I spent several hours going over really just 6 or 7 verses in Proverbs trying to give us something that would help. You know, it's like to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted, right? I made an effort to do that. I hope I give y'all something to think about. I'd love it if I give a proverb tonight that you think about for the rest of your life. I'm not necessarily saying I think that, but that's my desire. And all you got to do is come sit here and listen. Stay awake. Try to pay attention to the best of your ability. Don't check out on me, right? But that's not enough. You eat more than that. And all I'm saying is you ought to be doing the same for your soul. It's just reading your Bible. I think that's kind of the easy thing. There's other things you can do to kind of plug into that, but these ought to be things that we're doing on a regular basis. And let's ask yourself, when is the last time that my soul was fed? Amen. When is the last time that I sat down, you'll sit down and you'll do financial planning. You'll sit down and you'll make sure, I don't know where all of y'all are at in your medical life, but you'll sit down and you'll have your own custom little pill container and you'll pull all the right pills and I don't have a problem with any of that, but think of everything you do to take care of yourself, and then you just read your Bible for 5 minutes a day, a couple of chapters, and you call it good. Our focus a lot of times is not appropriate to take care of. It says in verse 8, we've got to be adding things to our life. He that getteth wisdom loveth his own soul. And I would say the Bible's a really good place to start. He that keepeth understanding shall find good. It's like one of those things, shall find good. What exactly does that mean? I have some notes. I'm probably going to have to move to the next verse pretty quickly. Even if I elaborated on that for an hour, just when I read to you, he that keepeth understanding shall find good, I feel like the natural response to that, well, whatever that is, I'm interested, right? Like, I'll take that, a double portion, right? Like, this is what I want. And so I would encourage us to be keeping understanding. I just want to give you one thought before we move to verse number 9. We can't spend all of this time on this verse. But just the fact that if you know what's good, if you understand something, you should keep it. Right? It says keeping understanding. I don't think it's a matter of retaining it and that, I have it and I'm never going to let it go. It's a matter of understanding some things and doing it. You know what ought to make you feel worse than anything is having understanding about something and not keeping it. It's one thing, have you ever done anything and it's like, and something happened. This is a horrible illustration because I'm making it up and I'm not really tying it to anything concrete. So you ever do anything and something bad happens, right? That's my illustration. And it's like, I didn't expect that to happen. I didn't think that was going to happen. I didn't know that was going to happen. Like, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but has anybody ever taken the radiator cap off of a hot vehicle, not knowing what would happen? It's like, it needs water. I am equipped for this purpose. You get a hose out, you get a bucket of water, you just reach down there and you start unscrewing it and it starts making a noise and you're like, well, it's just letting the air out. And little do you know what's all about to come out of that. I feel like, especially for guys, being sprayed in the face by boiling antifreeze is a rite of passage, right? It scalds and it stings and you're like, I'm going to go blind. This is the end, right? But the first time I did that, I don't really remember the circumstances. I'm quite certain looking back, I was old enough to know better type deal, right? But I didn't know what was, it's like, and I've even heard, like, don't open radiators when hot. Well, I'll just do it real slow, right? Like, I got this, right? And at some point, there's the, it's this, it'll shoot the cap off, and you're over there, doing that number with it, and didn't know it was going to do that. Like, Dad always said not to do it, but he didn't quite explain to me what would happen. But you know what? If I go do that now, I have no excuse, right? I deserve to have scalding antifreeze sprayed into my face because I did it once not knowing, but now I have that understanding earned by this, right? And all I'm saying is when we have that, like, when you know something, when you understand something, don't keep that, right? This is so, there's a sense in which, I don't mean to be too hyperbolic here, but there's a sense in which I mess up enough accidentally. You ever think about that? Like, I do enough stuff on accident, kind of unintentional. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't think it was going to turn out like that, to where when I know what I ought to be doing, I certainly ought to be. That's how you find good in your life. There's enough bad accidentally without knowing that it's going to be bad and doing it anyhow. That's really the kind of the sum total of being a foolish person. Look at verse number 9 with me. A false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall perish. If you recall, I briefly touched it back in verse number 5. Read verse number 5 with me again too. A false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall not escape. Verse number 9, a false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall perish. So obviously I'm not going to completely reiterate it, but I think at least deserves a mention of why so similar, so close, right? There's a very real sense in of which Proverbs has got some repetitive nature. Early on, as I was studying, I felt like it would be helpful, and I determined it was not, so I desisted from doing it. But every proverb I was kind of categorizing. Like, there's a proverb on this is a proverb on that, this is a proverb, I'm not really sure what this is even on, hard to categorize. I ended up with a lot of categories, and so I quit doing it. But there's some repetitive nature to Proverbs. I don't think anybody could deny that. And so, but normally they're not quite so back to back. So let me leave this thought with you from those. If you look it up, you look it up, somebody says, well, does anybody know what they call it? Does anybody have any idea what they call this? Like if you read some theological, they call it a scribal error, right? Does that surprise you, right? Like this is somebody probably made a mistake and lost track of where they're at. I don't think that's what's going on at all. I think it's you ever told somebody something twice? Let me even show you an escalation here. Verse number 5, a false witness shall not be unpunished, he that speaketh lies shall not escape. Verse number 9, a false witness shall not be unpunished, he that speaketh lies shall perish, right? So there is a reiteration here. I think he is definitely trying to drive the point home. That's really what Proverbs is generally. I mean, I think if you kind of boiled it down to its main categories, there's a dozen categories, maybe plus or minus, depending on how you were of a mind to put them together. But most of this is reiteration, right? And I would say here's an escalation more than a reiteration. He says, he said, I've thought about that. It's like, you tell your kid, if you do that, you're going to be in trouble. If you do that, you're not going to be able to walk for a week. like what you've done is you've applied a little bit more emphasis. You've applied a little bit more clarity. You've applied a little bit more understanding to what's going on here. I think that I don't think it's all that complicated. He's just simply saying, don't tell lies. You're going to have a problem. You're going to perish, as it were, in this verse. Look at verse number 10. We think about knowing our place. Verse number 10. Delight is not seemly for a fool, much less for a servant to have rule over princes. Delight is not seemly for a fool, much less for a servant to have rule over princes. So this is really a proverb about moral and social disorder. The idea here that we want to kind of unpack is things that are not where they ought to be, right? I don't think I watched Sesame Street. Sesame Street. I don't even know. Is it Sesame Street, right? Growing up, but I feel like I was raised when it was maybe bigger, and maybe it's big now, and I don't even. Is it even still on? Do they actually do it? Really? Okay. So maybe it's always been big, and I've just not been aware of it. Okay, I digress. So, but we had some videos or songs or something, and one of the songs, I don't really remember most of it, is like, which of these things doesn't belong, right? And so really this is what this verse is kind of talking about. There's some things that you just look at, and it's like you have an orange, a lime, a grapefruit, and that exhausted my citrus fruit right off the top of the head. So a lime, an orange, a grapefruit, a banana. Which of these things doesn't belong, right? The banana doesn't belong, right? Really, well, they're all fruit. Well, you would have been really bad at Sesame Street growing up, let me tell you that, right? So we understand it, and that's really what this verse is talking about. So there's two examples given to us. Number one, a fool living in pleasure, right? Delight. And this idea of delight, if you look it up, it really is this idea of just kind of pleasure and everything going well. A fool living in pleasure, and a servant ruling over princes. These concepts are presented as unnatural, improper, and I would even argue dangerous. But I want to make sure that I want to clarify something. This isn't a verse about poverty, slavery, or class prejudice. It's not talking, what is that term in India? Drawing a blank. The caste system. That's not what it's talking about. I was reading something, and they were arguing, or maybe it was something over the last weekend, something on the 4th of July. They were talking about how kings used the Bible to argue for rule, right? And it's not, I mean, the Catholics got pretty good at, the Bible says this, that's why we should be in charge of everything, right? Like, well, that's an interesting interpretation, right? But, right, so it's not a caste system, and I don't know if maybe any of us have seen it, like, who would be king if we had kings, like who of George Washington's descendants would be the king today? And actually, George Washington didn't have any kids. He had an adopted kid. So it's actually it would have been really bloody, probably, I guess, right? But, we don't. But there's a lot of people have had, it's hereditary, right? And it passes on. That's not what this verse is talking about. It's really people occupying conditions and places they're not morally or practically fitted for. Would be the idea of having a bad boss. Anybody ever had a bad boss? It's like, I was talking to somebody at work and they said that was a political hire. Like, right. So we're familiar with that type of stuff and who you work with and who you know and all that stuff. That goes on everywhere, no doubt on some level. But it is people occupying conditions they're not morally or practically fitted for. This word delight again means ease, luxury, pleasure, prosperity. It's more than just happiness. It's comfortable living. It's indulgence, luxury, honored, refined pleasure. So it's not that a fool never can have a good day. What it is saying is that comfort and prosperity do not belong safely in the hands of a fool, right? This doesn't even, you look at that and be like, it's like, that doesn't look right? There's something that doesn't fit what I expect kind of the world to be there. The word's not seemly, it carries the idea of unfitting, unbecoming, improper. It's something that does not suit a person. The fool in luxury is like a child with a loaded weapon. It's super dangerous, right? And it's because you have somebody that's a fool that really has access to stuff that really you need some wisdom to utilize, right? I'm going to use the term manipulate. And I don't mean that in a negative. I'm just talking about to manipulate things, right? To work it and to do all that, right? So, and that's not a good place for it's dangerous. A blessing can become dangerous when there's no character to govern it, I think is what this verse is telling us here. So it kind of begs the question, why is luxury, delight, if you will, not seemly for a fool? Well, a fool, I could give you verses for each of these, but let me just kind of throw them out there. A fool lacks restraint. We know this from Proverbs. A fool lacks humility. We also know this from Proverbs. A fool lacks discernment. We know this from Proverbs. A fool lacks the fear of God. A fool lacks teachability. A fool lacks self-government. That is not a good recipe for someone that has delight, for someone that has luxuries, if you will. Think about it. When you give someone ease, or let me not to someone. When you give a fool, right? Let's make sure we're staying contextual. When you give a fool ease, money, comfort, and pleasure, do you think it makes him a better person or a worse person? Right? You've given him something. You've injected something into his life. Well, on the face of it, it's delightful. It's good. It's a good thing. But it has a negative impact. It has negative consequences because of who you gave it to him. Proverbs 1 put it like this: for the turning away of the simple shall slay them, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. When fools are set up, there's problems to be had. It even goes on at the end of verse number 10. Verse number 10. It says much less. So we're intensifying the thought here. We're bearing down. We're pulling even more context and more thoughts out of this. Much less for a servant to have rule over princes. So really, when you say much less, what you're saying is this is even worse, right? It was bad enough the fool having delight. This is even a worse setting. A servant ruling over princes is even more disorderly. So again, I don't want to too narrowly define servant, because even if you go to the Hebrew word, you look up the word, there's a lot of definitions that can be. So it's not talking about a poor person, right? It's broader than that. So the point here is not a lower class person must never rule. In fact, I would even argue the scripture has many examples of what at the time would be considered men of low estate being raised up by God. Joseph, David, Daniel. I was thinking of another one. Maybe it was David that I was thinking about, right? David was a nobody. Even Saul was a nobody when they found him, right? So it's not a matter of poor people or people of no estate. It is not an issue of humble origin. 99.9% of all people that's ever walked the face of the earth are of humble origin, right? That's kind of the way. I'm listening to a book. It's called SPQR. That's like the Roman Senate letters or whatever. So it's about a history of the Roman Empire. And I'm listening to it, and basically we're still super early on, and she's going way too slow for my tasting. But so she's talking about this, and honestly, even she's being kind of honest. She's like, we really don't know. We really don't know. We really don't know. We really don't know. We're 600 BC, 800 BC, 400 BC. And we're talking about people that on some level have some name recognition. And we really don't know really anything about them. These are all much later writings about something that happened even 300 years ago by somebody who had every reason to lie about it, basically, right? And so we don't really know. All I'm saying is, even famous people, you really don't hardly know nothing about by and large, right? I mean, if I asked you to think of famous person, like if I just asked the average person that you go out there, talk to me for 30 minutes about George Washington. Most people may know who it is, but can you talk for 30 minutes about him? Maybe some of y'all probably could, right? But generally speaking, most people probably could not. And I simply say that, it's not just a matter of humble origins. I'm saying everybody's of humble origins. So that's not what this verse is talking about. Really, I think it's more likely a servant is likely represented by someone not trained, formed, or fitted for ruling. Some people are better at doing what they're told instead of telling other people what to do. They're just, and it's nothing, I'm not even saying that one's even necessarily better than the other. If the whole world was only good at giving orders, we'd have a pretty rough world, right? So, most of us need to be pretty good at doing what we're told, right? That's the way most things are going to work. Not only that, the servant here, again, using that term in its broadest sense, may carry resentment and pettiness and insecurity of a man that's not fit to lead other people. Princes, I think, is, again, more than just having a royal lineage. It's just representing men that are fitted to rule. And I think princes is an interesting word to use for this reason. Most of the time, royals would get an education that almost spent their entire life preparing them to rule. That doesn't mean they all did a good job by any stretch of the imagination. You'll have to read. But I think of, what's the King of England's name right now? Does anybody know? Is it Charles? Charles, right? Shame on every last American of y'all that could name that so quickly. Okay, so Charles, and he's old, right? He's probably in his 70s or something at this point. But at any rate, he looks old, right? And I thought about when his mother, it would have been his mother, right, that died, passed away. My guess is Charles going to be like, I don't even know what to do. How does this work? Somebody explain to me what's going on. My guess is Charles has been waiting his entire life for his mom today, right? And he probably knew exactly what the process was going to look like. He probably knew everything that was expected out of him, and he stepped right into the role seamlessly, right? Now, I realize that doesn't always happen, but all I'm saying is this was a man who had basically spent 70 years of his life being prepared to lead a nation. I really don't know if he's doing a good job. It's really outside of my spirit, but you understand what I'm saying. There are some people that are trained and taught and coached and all of that, and you don't want to just go grab, I don't know, maybe y'all have heard this statistic too, that like everybody in Europe is basically in line to the English throne if you go very far back, right? It's just so much mix at this point. It would have been like just going and saying, well, technically you're 38th in line to the throne, which out of 7 billion people, that's pretty high on the list, right? And just finding the 38th most and saying, now you're king. My guess is that person he has no clue what to do. It would be literally a servant having rule over princes. It's not seemly. It's not right. Proverbs 30 puts it like this, and then we'll move on. For 3 things the earth is disquieted, and 4 which it cannot bear. For a servant when he reigneth, a fool when he is filled with meat, for an odious woman when she is married, and a handmaid that is heir to her mistress. It really is the concern that it's not a simple social idea. It's that an unstable aversion that the earth can, right? When people are in the wrong place, it causes trouble. You got to have the right people in the right place. Look at verse number 11. The discretion of a man, this is on discretion. The discretion of a man deferreth his anger, and it is his glory to pass over a transgression. So let me define some words for us before we move into the verse. The word discretion here means sound judgment that governs reaction. It's not merely intelligence. I would use the term, I read definitions, and so all this is kind of made up, right? You're not going to find this in Webster's, right? It's wisdom under pressure. It's the ability to see a situation clearly, weigh it rightly, and refuse to let anger take the lead, right? Very contextually, right? So it's being able to not just know things, just being able to apply what you know when you know. Discretion, the word deferring means delaying, postponing, holding something back from immediate action, right? It sounds, I don't know if we use that term often, but deferred adjudication, if you get like a ticket or whatever, you can go in there and say, as long as I don't ever do anything wrong for the next 6 months, none of this will count at all, right? You're saying I'm putting off kind of punishment as long as I drive right and all that stuff, right? We're pushing it out. Let me define the word transgression. This is probably not as a great sock either. It means the crossing of a line, right? Just colloquial. It's more, and I would bear down on it slightly. It is more than just an accident, right? It's not like, it's like you didn't accidentally do something. It's like you saw the line and you stepped over, right? Like there's an intentionality, no doubt, to this. The word Passover, or the phrase Passover, means to overlook, step past, refuse to prosecute an offense personally. So we're familiar with that, this idea to overlook, to step past. I remember, man, years ago, I may have been with Zachary, and there was an incident, and so somebody, you've seen the concrete mixers, right? They got the little engine on the side, and they mix the concrete, and they can like dump it over. Does anybody other than Juan and Jacob know what I'm talking about, right? Okay, right. So somebody had the bright idea, this was Zachary, who something was going on, and he like stuck a shovel in it. Again, these are professionals, right? Stuck a shovel in it. Well, it ripped it out of his hand, like hit him right in the face, and like busted his lip pretty good. I don't think it broke no teeth. I don't remember all the details. And it was a whole thing, right? Right? And so, but so they normally when anything like that happens, they do an investigation and they want witness statements. They want everybody that was kind of on the crew standing there, like, why did y'all let them stuff a shovel in it, right? They want people to write out. And there was multiple people that wrote this on their witness statement. My back was turned at the time of the incident, right? Like, yeah, I bet your back was turned. That's called staying out of what doesn't, right? And so that's what I think about when I think about this term Passover. Like, nope, I didn't see nothing, right? And it's one thing if you're doing that at work when you did see something, but in your own life, when people are transgressing against you, you should develop the ability to be like, my back was turned when they did it. Mainly for your benefit, right? If somebody transgressed against you, they probably don't care, right? Generally speaking, because if they cared, they probably wouldn't have done it. So now you have a choice of what to do, and it is to fill out your witness statement. My back was turned at the occasion of the shovel hitting the guy in the face. So we defined the words, right? Discretion, deferring, transgression, passing over. So it says, the discretion of a man deferreth his anger. So we're talking about putting it off. So let me give this to you. And I think this has been talked about. I think I've talked about it. Maybe even Pastor has in some context. But the Bible doesn't say, it doesn't categorically say never be angry under any circumstances for any reason, right? That's not really the biblical mandate here. What the Bible does talk about is don't get angry. I'm going to use the term on accident, and what I mean by that is on the spur of the moment, without thinking about it, without any forethought. It says it's not good to be angry quickly. It's not good to be angry without a reason. It's not good to get angry for the wrong reason, right? So anger itself is not the problem. It's very dangerous just because of how close all the problems are. But just from a most pure technical standpoint, the Bible doesn't say never be angry about anything under any circumstances. It does give a lot of cautions because it is definitely one thing that can get out of hand. So I say that to say this, even in verse number 11, it doesn't say, does say defer his anger. So it doesn't say he never gets angry, but it does say he pushes it out away from him, right? And at least he's not doing it right now. Most of the time, if you can wait for, I can use the term 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 weeks, say, I need to come back to this. And if you're not angry tomorrow, it probably wasn't worth getting angry yesterday. That's a general rule. Life is pretty complicated, but I think we can state that pretty authoritatively. If if you wait and don't say anything, don't get angry now, and you won't be angry tomorrow, next week, next month. You should not get angry right now. So it says it deferreth. This is the wisdom, right? We talk, it's discretion, it's sound judgment that's governing our reaction. It says it's deferring his anger. It says it's his glory, right? You hear the sound of like, whoa, right? Your glory, right? This is a good thing. This makes a man appear, in one sense, probably kind of better than he is, really, by doing something like this. And think about it. You ever seen anybody have every reason to get angry? It's like, oh, if they'd have done that to me, right? They had every reason to get angry, and you can tell it's just like they're just having to. It's like they're just like, and they're doing a really good job. It's just like they're just kind of like, be cool, man, right? Just like chilling out and not doing what would even be natural, what would be expected at this point, and every time I've seen that, I've been pretty impressed with that. The word glory, part of me says, we only use that in specific reference to the Lord, right? So part of, that's kind of where I go with that. But there's obviously a connotation here to where when we see that, that's an amazing, wonderful, miraculous, spectacular thing. It's better to let go of it. Right? It says that. It is his glory to pass over a transgression. And I thought about this. Let me kind of draw out some details here. This idea, it says it's glory to pass over a transgression. So again, this isn't something like, it's not an accident. We're talking about somebody did something to you, right? They trespassed against you, if you will, transgressed, came over the line. It's like you draw a line and say, if you cross this line, we're going to have problems. And they go, and you're like, yeah, we got problems, all right? It's that type of deal. And you know what it does not tell us to do? It does not say it is his glory to ignore a transgression. Now, I'm not saying you couldn't ever make that application, but just stay with my train of thought. It doesn't say to ignore it. It doesn't say to go around it. It doesn't say keep it for later. It doesn't say to go under it. It doesn't say to go through it. It says to go over it, right? You ever gone, like, how high of a fence do you think you could jump right now? Right? Like, you have a dead sprint, and we're going to have the fences progressively higher. We're going to have 4 feet, 5 feet. And there's actually a technique to it. I'm not saying I have perfected. I've seen enough people do it. And if you're good, you can kind of like just put your hands on the rail and kind of with momentum just swing over. But you only have one crack at this, right? So it's going to be difficult, right? So think about it. If we go out there, there's a chain link fence right there. We just all go line up in the alley and say, everybody go jump over the fence. And it would probably be, okay, let's, and then you're like, why would I go over it when I can just go up to the gate and go around it, right? There's a sense in which that would make sense. Sometimes going over something is more difficult than going around it, right? Would we all agree with that? And so I'm kind of making maybe a bigger deal than you'll see out of this, but it all made sense in my head, right? And the fact that he's telling us to go over it, so it's not a matter of the fact that you're ignoring the transgression, acting like it didn't happen. You're dealing with it. You're confronting it, not with that person, but with yourself, in your own heart, in your own mind. I'm not going through the open gate. I'm not trying to crawl under the fence. I'm not trying to cut the fence. I'm not shaking the fence and saying I'm going over it, right? I'm making the effort to get over this thing. So let's apply it. If you bring it up later, did you get over it? It does say, look at what it says. It is his glory to pass over a transgression. When you pass over something, it's behind you, right? So think about it. You're like, I passed over that transgression. But then something else happened, and you're like, you see this transgression right here? You thought I forgot about that, didn't you? I didn't forget it. That's not getting over something. That's not moving past it. It's adding it to a mental list. I'm going to get over it this time. That's not getting over it. Because what you've done, when you say stuff like, I'm going to get over it this time, what you're saying is, I am keeping track, and there may be a this time where I choose not to get over it, right? There should never be, I'm going to pass over it this time, because all that tells me is you're keeping track. That's not passing over. That's not passing over. You realize it's not that hard to be angry and bitter and never forgive or forget what someone did to you. That's not that hard to do. In fact, that is kind of our default state. You ought to beg God to help you forget every bad thing that's ever been done to you. You ought to say, God, I want you to take this out of my mind. I don't ever want to remember this again. Say, but you don't know what they did. If I'm not careful, I'll be burnt again. You can't, not from that you can't, because I've passed over that. I've gotten over that. I'm not, that's my glory. I'm passing over that transaction. I would really ask you the question is, how long are you going to keep track of it? How long are you going to, it's like you're, maybe if you're really athletic, you go over to that chain link fence there and you hop over it, and the next morning you get up and you're mad you have to hop over it this way, you got to hop over it that way, and you just make a life over, I'm passing over it, I'm passing over it, I'm passing over it. This idea of passing over it only happens, it's a one-time thing, right? You wouldn't pass over it twice. With some cross-references there, this will probably be the last verse we look at. Let me give you the few cross-references I have. Micah 5:18. Who is a God like unto thee, that pardoneth iniquity, and passeth by the transgression of the remnant of his heritage? Think about the way that you pass over things versus the way that God passed over stuff for you. And it's completely ridiculous to think about, right? But just imagine every time you did something, and God's like, yeah, I knew you weren't for real last time. I knew I couldn't trust you. I knew that you were going to do this again. Has God ever told you that? I don't think so. So he passeth by the transgression of the remnant of his heritage. Proverbs 10:12 puts it like this. Hatred stirreth up strifes, but love covereth most of the sins. I wish it said that, because it would make life easier in one sense, but it says love covereth all sins. So, hey, I don't know how you interpret that, but let me tell you how I interpret it and see if you can find a biblical reason to not agree with my interpretation. If you decide that the sin's not going to be covered, it's because you don't love like you ought to. Not because that person did something really bad, but because you don't love like you ought to. Because it doesn't say, love covereth all the minor sins. You do something really bad to me, and love don't cover that. Well, love covers whatever you want it to cover. You realize that. You get to decide what your love covers. 100%. Goodness knows nobody can do it for you, because what we ought to do is we all ought to decide what your love ought to cover in everybody else's life. You don't get that right, though, because you make bad choices on stuff like this, right? So no, but the problem is you get to decide. It says love covereth all sins. So I want you to think about this. Well, we're going to be wrapping up here in a second. Every time a sin's not covered, it doesn't say it's not a sin. We're acknowledging that reality. Every time the transgression is not passed over, you say, I don't love that person like I could, like I should, like God maybe wants me to. Because if I loved them like I should, this would not be a big deal. Proverbs 17:19. He that covereth a transgression seeketh love. Yeah, but he that repeateth a matter separateth the very friend, right? Yeah, keep on bringing it up and see how that works out for you, right? There's really not, we're all familiar with that. Don't you love it when somebody said, I'm never going to bring that up again, and next time they're mad at you, they're dragging it right back up. You're like, I thought I was not going to be in trouble for that anymore, right? Right? And all I'm saying is the reality is you can only do that type of stuff for so long before you don't have very many friends left. Because nobody wants to be a friend to somebody that will never let anything go. Listen, most of us have been coming here for a good long time at this point. If we won't learn to let stuff go inside the walls of the church right here, you may come to church and you may be involved and you may love the church and all that, but you may not have any friends here. And it may not necessarily be the fact that that they don't think that they're your friend. You don't have any friends, right? Because of your inability to keep repeating matter. You say, well, and let me maybe even add it a little bit more. It's not that you're always necessarily bringing up to them. You realize you can repeat a matter in your own head, right? You can literally separate yourself from a friend and never even say anything to the friend, right? Just by repeating it over and over in your head. The New Testament, in case you thought it didn't address it, it says, and above all things, have fervent charity among yourselves. For charity shall cover the multitude of sins. So, I would just read the verse again. We're wrapped up here. The discretion of a man deferreth his anger. I don't ever want to be mad right here, right now. I want to be mad tomorrow. If this is worth being mad, I'll be mad tomorrow. And it is glory to pass over a transgression. So, my guess is, to a greater or lesser degree, there's probably not hardly a person here that doesn't have a transgression they probably shouldn't be get over tonight, right? Greater or lesser degree, maybe you're all tip-top and everything. That's possible, but probably for most of us, we could do. There's something, and you say, well, how do you know if that applies to you? If there's something in your head right now, it applied to you, right? A person, an occasion, a transgression came up. That's the one I'm talking about. Just in case you were wondering, that is definitely the one I was referring to. I mean, I appreciate your attention. You can stand.